Hello and welcome to another load balancer provider meeting for SIG Cluster Lifecycle and Cluster API. Just a reminder that this meeting is being recorded and will be posted up to YouTube afterwards. And the general Kubernetes community code of conduct does apply. So in general, please be excellent to one another. Earlier last week, Andy, Nadir, and myself got together and we started hashing out an alternative implementation that wouldn't rely necessarily on the service and endpoint types, specifically because I think we've identified some issues that would prevent immediate adoption of a service-based design. So I think that was the main outstanding action item that we had previously. And with KubeCon this week, I don't expect too many of us will have much of a chance to make additional progress this week. So I'm thinking as a group, it might be good to, instead of following up next week, maybe follow up the week after. Are there any objections to that?
I think the week after is Thanksgiving for the
Oh,
US.
is it? Yeah, so the week after is Thanksgiving. Do we want to go ahead and make it 3 weeks out then?
So that would be December 7th.
I think it would be November 30th.
Okay, that's 2 weeks from today.
Oh, is it?
Yeah.
Okay.
So
okay.
This week is KubeCon, next week is Thanksgiving, and then the week of November 30th through December 4th would be the week after Thanksgiving.
Okay, so I think that would be fine. All right, so that's out of the way. Are there, I don't think we're necessarily ready to discuss the proposals and long-term and short-term implications right now. I think most of the work that we probably have to do is continue hashing out both of the designs and the additional work around there. Are there any discussion items that anybody thinks of that we need to discuss in the group, or do we mostly have asynchronous work at this point?
Just a question in terms of the pre-drain and pre-term hook on machines. Is that a finalizer, or is that something else?
It is not a finalizer, and when we were discussing it, we wanted to make sure that it wasn't a finalizer because we wanted to make sure that there's the ability for the load balancer to take action prior to the machine deletion so that we can have kind of safe removal from the load balancer. It's a proposal that was merged relatively recently and implemented by Michael and the Red Hat folks.
So you don't want to force somebody to delete a machine to have it removed from a load balancer?
Oh, no, what it is the pre-drain and pre-termination hooks right now are annotations that are defined on the machine resource. And if they are set, it blocks the actual reconciliation of the machine until those annotations are removed.
Okay.
And I can go ahead and dig up the link to that proposal, and we can link that here in this space too.
Yeah, maybe just highlight the difference.
Yeah, well, the big difference is the finalizer doesn't prevent reconciliation of the machine deletion happening and the underlying infrastructure being removed. It only prevents the API resource from being deleted from the API server. And the pre-drain and pre-termination hooks specifically block the reconciliation so that the underlying infrastructure isn't removed prior to the action taking place.
Okay, makes sense.
But thank you for bringing up that we need to provide more context and detail there.
Yeah, I think what you said earlier, Jason, is accurate, that this was just some brainstorming that isn't fully fleshed out. And so we need to finish doing that before we really go over it with the group. But definitely a good question, Motion. Thanks for asking.
Cool. And then also on the machine, the name, what other targets besides for machines would this include? Or is this scoped for?
So one of the reasons, and initially we had talked about having it specific to machine, and one of the reasons why I was hesitant to kind of locking specifically into a machine was if we do plan on going with like service type load balancer in the future, it would have a way for us to transition or support alternative implementations.
Well, so if your interface is not on the machine load balancer, but on the contract that the load balancer ref defines, so whatever is defined by the ref must implement a particular status, then you could use a machine load balancer with an infra ref, or you could use a service load balancer with a service reference. And then there's no, whether it's a machine load balancer or service load balancer is not relevant as you move
Right.
the interface from machine load balancer to load balancer ref.
Right. Part of the reason why we were looking at this is so that other components of Cluster API have a common resource that they can refer to be able to interact with it, rather than having to know the various different underlying implementations.
Well, so they can interact with whatever the load balancer ref points to using duck typing. So it must have a specific status. Unless this is a pattern that wants to be explicitly enabled. So have a load balancer and then have a service infrastructure ref and a machine load balancer infrastructure ref. Just seems that there might be quite a lot of objects involved there.
You see?
So I had a question on another subject related to this. I guess since it's a new resource, most of the migration and adoption of existing load balancing would be the responsibility of the provider. Is that accurate?
Do you have an answer for that, Andy, or?
No, I was going to respond to what Moshe was saying.
Okay. For the implementation details, I don't necessarily know that we've fully defined that. I think we had toyed around with the idea that there could potentially be some common reconciliation behavior, but I don't think we necessarily defined exactly what that would be versus the provider implementation at this point. All right. So hopefully that answers your question, Yassine. All right. Andy?
Right. So I think I agree with what Moshe was saying about the duck typing and contracts. So if we treat this like we do the other types and the other references, where doesn't matter if it's an AWS machine or an Azure machine or whatever, I think the same principles can apply here. So if we want to call this machine load balancer, we can, and have multiple implementations. This would be like 2 levels of implementations, where you would have the cluster that points to some load balancer type that implements a contract, which points to an infrastructure aspect for a load balancer that implements a contract. So it would be a little bit different, but same concept, really.
And then just one other question on the endpoint URL. Shouldn't that be in status?
Did you want to take that, Andy, or?
I can. So the way that we are, the restrictions that we have are that if there's anything that we can't rediscover based on information that we have in the spec, we have to store it in the spec and not the status. So this is like, I think it's too early to talk about this right now, other than we need to do some R&D to figure out what the contract looks like. So for this particular one, if we create an NLB and for whatever reason we couldn't figure out what its DNS name was, it would have to go in the spec. I think it probably could go in status, but at this point, I think that's low on the priority list, but definitely something that we'll figure out as we go through this.
Cool.
And just to add on, the other aspect of it is we also want to be able to retain the same behavior that we have today, where somebody can specify the endpoint URL externally, whether it's because whatever provider doesn't support automatic DNS creation and there's some external action that needs to be taken, or we're talking about kind of like the staged adoption path, where somebody's not actually making use of some of the cluster API components as well.
Wouldn't that be like on a static load balancer with just a static endpoint that actually doesn't do anything?
Indeed, we talked about potentially having the ability to have like a no-op provider or something. And I see Nadir and Yassine both have their hands raised, but I'm not sure who was first.
I must apologize. My hand raising skills are very bad.
That's fine. Nadir?
Sure. Just on what you just said, Jason, there's some stories 5A and 5B sort of talk about the use cases for exactly that. If you want to have a look. Obviously, we need to start cross-referencing the user stories to requirements to our actual design, but that's the intent.
And Yassine?
Yeah, I also wanted to add that there are some users that are in a cloud provider environment but still control their own DNS and do not want to rely on the auto-generated one, but rather on a one that is stored in a custom DNS they own.
All right. Anything else? All right. If not, I think the action items are more generally, let's continue fleshing out the 2 proposals that we have in here. Let's go ahead and try to start cross-linking in the proposals to some of the various use cases and requirements that we have. And I will go ahead and schedule a meeting to reconvene on the 30th.
Cool.
All right. Thank you all.
Thanks,
And
everyone.
I will see you all in 2 weeks.
Thank you.